Ever feel like you're running a race you can't win? Like the finish line keeps moving further away no matter how hard you push? Chester, a 41-year-old industrial maintenance technician, knew that feeling intimately. 15 years he'd spent at the same plant, fixing broken machines, chasing deadlines, and slowly watching his life shrink to the space between his alarm clock and the factory gates. He was good at his job. He could diagnose a failing bearing from across the shop floor, a skill that had earned him respect, but it hadn't earned him peace. His days were a blur of grease, strained muscles, and the constant thrum of machinery, a symphony of broken promises and deferred dreams. Chester's small house in a working-class neighborhood needed work. A leaky faucet peeling paint, a garden choked with weeds. It mirrored the state of his soul, neglected and slowly falling apart. $45,000 in debt weighed him down, a constant, silent pressure that stole his sleep and fueled his anxiety. He was haunted by the memory of his late wife, Sarah, gone too soon. He always thought there would be more time later. Raising two teenagers alone, Leo and Maya, felt more like managing a business than nurturing a family. Dinners were rushed, conversations were strained, and the silence between them was thick with unspoken needs. He provided, he disciplined, but the connection felt distant, transactional. Chester's breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon. Maya had a soccer game, a championship game, and he'd promised he'd be there. A double shift at the plant crushed that promise. He returned home to find a note on the kitchen counter, a single sentence in Maya's handwriting. "You promised." It wasn't an accusation, just a simple statement of fact. But it landed on him like a hammer blow. That night, Chester couldn't sleep. The weight of those two words, "You promised," echoed in his mind, amplified by the silence of the house. He tossed and turned, the familiar ache in his back a constant reminder of his age and the demands of his job. Eventually, he gave up, sliding out of bed and padding down to the living room. The television flickered with static, the only sound in the house. He grabbed a book from his nightstand, a self-help book he'd hidden there, ashamed to admit he needed it. He sank into his worn armchair, the one Sarah had always loved, and began to read. The words seemed to jump off the page, speaking directly to his exhaustion and despair. The book talked about the power of tiny 1% improvements. It wasn't about grand gestures or overnight transformations, but about small, consistent steps. A realization washed over him, a simple but profound truth. He didn't have to fix his whole life today. He just had to fix one small thing. The sheer scale of his problems, the debt, the decaying house, the fractured relationship with his kids had paralyzed him. But maybe, just maybe, he could start with something manageable. Chester was 41 years old, an industrial maintenance technician with 15 years of experience. He'd spent half his life fixing machines, diagnosing problems, and finding solutions. He could hear a failing bearing from across the shop floor, but he couldn't seem to fix his own life. His world felt like a machine grinding to a halt, and he was the only one who could pull it apart and put it back together. His regrets loomed large. Not finishing his degree, not spending more time with Sarah, always putting things off until later. Later never came. He thought of Leo, 16, consumed by video games and barely acknowledging his presence. He pictured Maya, 14, her bright spirit dimmed by his absence. He remembered Sarah, her laughter, her unwavering belief in him. He recalled marrying Sarah, the happiest day of his life, or the day he taught Leo to ride a bike. He paid off his parents' old car loan. That was a proud moment. The next morning, Chester woke up before his alarm. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. Instead of his usual routine of staring blankly at the wall while he drank his coffee, he walked outside. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. He noticed the weeds choking Sarah's old vegetable patch, a project he'd neglected since her passing. He spent 15 minutes pulling weeds, the cool morning air filling his lungs. It wasn't much, but it was something. At work that day, Chester found himself listening more not just to the machinery, but to his coworkers. He even managed a brief conversation with a younger technician, sharing a tip he'd learned years ago. It was a small thing, but it felt good to connect with someone to offer his expertise. When he got home that evening, he found Leo tinkering with his old motorcycle, the 1978 Harley-Davidson Sportster he'd been meaning to restore for years. "Need a hand, Dad?" Leo asked, surprising Chester. Chester hesitated, then smiled. "Yeah, I think I do." He walked towards the garage, the weight on his shoulders feeling a little bit lighter. The 4:30 a.m. alarm still felt like a personal insult. Chester, 41, dragged himself out of bed, the familiar aches in his back a constant reminder of his age and his job. The small, two-story house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the aging structure. He padded downstairs, his worn slippers scuffing against the linoleum floor. Coffee? Black. That was the first order of business. He poured a cup, the strong aroma filling the small kitchen. He stared out the window, the working-class neighborhood still cloaked in darkness. Chain-link fences, trucks in driveways, a sense of quiet desperation hanging in the air. The leaky faucet in the bathroom still needed fixing, another item on the ever-growing list. The house needed a new coat of paint. He remembered Sarah, her nagging him about it every summer. Now, it just sat there, another symbol of his failure. The drive to the plant was a blur of dark highway and flashing headlights. Chester listened to the radio, a classic rock station, the same one he'd been listening to for 20 years. He arrived at 5:30 a.m. The plant loomed before him, a hulking metal beast that consumed his days. Another 10-hour shift loomed. As an industrial maintenance technician with 15 years under his belt, Chester knew every pipe, every valve, every creaking joint in that place. He could diagnose a problem by sound alone, a skill he took a small amount of pride in. The day was a relentless grind. A busted pump, a malfunctioning conveyor belt, a clogged drain. Each problem was a small fire that needed to be put out, a constant barrage that left him feeling drained. He worked alongside younger guys, some fresh out of trade school, full of energy and optimism. He remembered being like that once. Now the best he could hope for was to get through the day without anything major breaking down. At one point, his supervisor, a portly man named Bob, asked him to stay for another 4 hours. Double shift. He thought of Maya's soccer game. He tried to say no, but the words just died in his throat. He was trapped. Lunch was a lukewarm burger eaten in the break room, surrounded by the cacophony of machinery and idle chatter. He scrolled through his phone, paying bills. Another reminder of the $45,000 in debt that hung over him like a storm cloud. $25,000 in medical bills from Sarah's illness, a constant, agonizing reminder of his loss. $12,000 on the Ford F-150, his only means of getting to work. $8,000 in credit card debt, the result of years of living paycheck to paycheck. He made $3,800 a month, but it never seemed to be enough. The drive home was even more draining than the drive-in. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the landscape. He picked up fast food, chicken nuggets and fries, a dinner of convenience and despair. He arrived home to find Leo lost in video games, barely acknowledging his presence. Maya was not home. He found the simple note on the counter. "You promised." The weight of those words crushed him. He ate dinner alone in front of the TV, the flickering images providing a temporary escape. He dozed off on the couch, waking up a few hours later with a stiff neck and a sense of overwhelming hopelessness. Stumbling to bed at 10:30 p.m., he knew he'd be doing it all again tomorrow. This was his life. It was a loop with no exit. Chester lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The digital clock glowed 10:37 p.m. Sleep wouldn't come. He replayed the note in his mind. "You promised." Maya's handwriting, simple, direct, a mirror reflecting his failure. He thought of her, small, determined, kicking that soccer ball since she was barely able to walk. Sarah would have been there, cheering, beaming with pride. Sarah was always there. He pushed himself up, the springs in the old mattress groaning in protest. He padded down to the living room, the house silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. He found himself drawn to the bookshelf, a relic from better days. Sarah had loved to read. He ran his hand along the spines, a silent eulogy. His fingers stopped on a small, worn book tucked away in the corner. The Power of Habit. He'd bought it months ago, another attempt to fix himself. He had hidden it, embarrassed by the self-help cliché. He pulled it out, the pages falling open to a marked passage. "Tiny changes, remarkable results," he scoffed. What good were tiny changes when his life was a raging dumpster fire? 41 years old, an industrial maintenance technician with 15 years under his belt. A dead wife, 2 kids slipping away, and a mountain of debt. A small 2-story house that needed a new coat of paint, a leaky faucet he kept meaning to fix, and a life that felt like it had been put on hold. What could a tiny change possibly do? Chester sat on the edge of the couch, the book heavy in his hands. He remembered his dad, a mechanic, always saying, "Even the biggest machine can be fixed one bolt at a time." He'd laughed it off then, eager to escape the factory life. But now the words echoed in the silence. He thought of his Harley-Davidson Sportster, a 1978, disassembled in the garage. He started restoring it before Sarah got sick, dreaming of long road trips. It sat there now, a monument to unfinished business. He remembered the feel of the wrench in his hand, the satisfaction of bringing something broken back to life. Maybe his life wasn't so different. He opened the book again, his eyes scanning the page. 1% better. Just one small thing. He thought of the leaky faucet, the one that dripped incessantly, a constant reminder of his neglect. Put up a flicker of something unfamiliar igniting within him. Not hope, not yet. Just a tiny spark of agency. He walked to the kitchen, grabbed his toolbox, and headed towards the bathroom. The dripping faucet mocked him with its steady rhythm. "All right," he muttered to himself, his voice raspy. "One bolt at a time." He tightened the wrench, the dripping slowed, then stopped. Silence. He stood there for a moment, the silence amplifying the quiet desperation he'd been carrying. Then a faint smile touched his lips. Not a solution, not a victory, just a start. Chester stood there, the silence in the bathroom almost deafening after the constant drip. The scar above his left eyebrow, a souvenir from his apprentice days, seemed to throb faintly. He remembered Sarah teasing him about it, calling him her battle-scarred warrior. Now the only battles he fought were against his own apathy. He looked in the mirror, 41 years old, a grease-stained ghost of the man he used to be. He saw the weariness etched into his face, the quiet despair that had become his constant companion. He turned away from the mirror, a wave of nausea washing over him. He thought of Maya's soccer game, the note on the counter burning itself into his memory. He had promised. Promises were supposed to mean something. Just like he promised Sarah he'd take care of the kids. Just like he promised himself he'd finish his degree. Empty promises, all of them. He walked back into the living room, the TV still flickering with some late-night show he wasn't even watching. Leo was probably holed up in his room, headphones on, lost in his own world. Maya was likely asleep, dreaming of goals he hadn't been there to see. He sank back onto the couch, the self-help book now feeling like a lead weight in his lap. 1%. It sounded so insignificant. He thought about his debt, $45,000, a mountain he couldn't even imagine climbing. The house needed repairs, the roof, the paint, the damn faucet. More money, more problems. It felt like everything was crumbling around him and he was too tired to care. But something had shifted. The disappointment in Maya's note, the echo of his father's words, the small victory over the faucet, it all coalesced into a single, stark realization. He was done. Done with the numb routine, the quiet despair, the slow decay, done letting life happen to him. He stood up, his joints protesting with a familiar crackle. He walked into the kitchen, grabbed a pad of paper and a pen from the junk drawer. He sat down at the kitchen table, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. He wrote the number 45,000 at the top of the page. Then underneath he wrote faucet fixed. He knew it was a ridiculous start, but it was a start nonetheless. He stared at the numbers, a flicker of determination hardening his gaze. He wouldn't fix everything tonight. He wouldn't suddenly become the perfect father, the debt-free homeowner, but he could fix one small thing. He could make one small promise and keep it. He looked at the numbers again. "I am done living like this," Chester said aloud, his voice rough. It wasn't a declaration of triumph, but a quiet vow. He would find a way, one bolt at a time. The numbers on the paper swam slightly in the harsh light. Chester, 41-year-old industrial maintenance technician, knew he needed a plan. He remembered Sarah's words, how she used to say, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, Chester." He always dismissed it as a saying, something to be nice. But now, staring at his debt, the leaky roof, and the growing distance between him and Leo and Maya, the saying seemed true. He pulled out his phone. It was a cheap model, the screen cracked from dropping it at the plant. He started searching, budgeting apps. He swiped through several, each one more complicated than the last. He felt that familiar wave of overwhelm begin to rise. He almost closed the app, but he remembered Maya's note. "You promised." He downloaded one with a simple interface, one that tracked income and expenses, nothing fancy. The first entry was easy, $3,800 a month. He knew that number. The next was harder, expenses. He started listing the big ones, mortgage, car payment, utilities, food. He quickly reached $3,000. He hadn't even accounted for gas, clothes, or school supplies for the kids. He felt the despair creeping back in. Where would he even begin to cut back? Chester thought about his father, the mechanic. "Chester," he'd say, wrench in hand, "don't stare at the whole engine. Find the problem, fix it, move on." It was time for a single step, one problem. He canceled his cable subscription. That was $80 a month, almost $1,000 a year. It was a small cut, but he felt a flicker of control return. He wrote cable cut under faucet fixed with a small check mark. He looked at the list again, his gaze hardening. He'd been living on autopilot for 5 years, just surviving. It wasn't living, it was existing. He remembered Sarah's vegetable patch, how she'd meticulously weeded and watered it even when she was sick. He hadn't touched it since she passed. The next day, Chester woke up before dawn like he always did. But instead of going straight to work, he went into the backyard. He pulled on his old work gloves and started weeding. The sun peeked over the horizon, casting a golden light on the overgrown garden. He worked slowly, deliberately pulling out the weeds one by one. It was a start. It was enough. He stood there, the early morning chill seeping into his bones, dirt caked under his fingernails. The small act of weeding felt monumental. He'd been running from her memory, from the life they had, buried in work and exhaustion. Now, standing in the skeletal remains of Sarah's garden, he felt a flicker of something akin to hope. Not the soaring, unrealistic kind, but a quiet, grounded hope. That night, after another soul-crushing shift at the plant, Chester didn't collapse on the couch. Leo was in his room, headphones on, probably gaming. Maya was at the kitchen table, hunched over her homework. He walked over to her, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. "Hey," he said, his voice raspy. Maya looked up, her expression guarded. "Hey," she replied, not meeting his eyes. I missed your game today," he said, shuffling his feet. "Had to cover a double." "I'm sorry, Maya," she shrugged, picking at a loose thread on her jeans. "It's fine," she mumbled, but the hurt in her voice was unmistakable. Chester's fists clenched. He hated this distance between them. He hated the way his life had become. He took a deep breath. "There's a game next week, right?" Maya nodded. "I'll be there," he said firmly. "No matter what, I promise." He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a brief glimmer of belief. It was enough. For now, it was enough. He needed to follow through, needed to be there, not just physically, but present. He knew he had a long way to go to earning her trust back, earning his children's respect. Back in his room, Chester stared at the ceiling. He thought about that note Maya had left. "You promised." It wasn't accusatory, not really, but it cut him deeper than any shouting ever could. It was a stark reminder of his failures, his broken promises. He reached for the self-help book he'd been hiding, the one he'd dismissed as useless drivel. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning for something, anything to cling to. 1% improvement. The words jumped out at him. It wasn't about getting out of debt overnight or magically fixing his relationship with his kids. It was about making small, consistent changes one day at a time. He thought about his Harley in the garage, a project he'd abandoned years ago. He hadn't even looked at it in months. He pictured himself years from now, gray and old, still buried in debt and regret, his kids gone, the Harley rusting in the corner. The thought sent a jolt of fear through him. He made a promise not just to Maya, but to himself, to Sarah's memory, to the man he used to be, the one who had dreams and aspirations. He wouldn't let his life slip away. He would start small, he would be present, he would show up. The next day, Chester brought his lunch to work instead of buying fast food. He sat alone in the break room, eating his sandwich, a small act of defiance against the crushing routine. It was just one step, but it was a step in the right direction, 1%. Back in his room, Chester stared at the ceiling. He thought about that note Maya had left. "You promised." It wasn't accusatory, not really, but it cut him deeper than any shouting ever could. It was a stark reminder of his failures, his broken promises. He reached for the self-help book he'd been hiding, the one he'd dismissed as useless drivel. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning for something, anything to cling to. 1% improvement. The words jumped out at him. It wasn't about getting out of debt overnight or magically fixing his relationship with his kids. It was about making small, consistent changes one day at a time. He thought about his Harley in the garage, a project he'd abandoned years ago. He hadn't even looked at it in months. He pictured himself, years from now, gray and old, still buried in debt and regret, his kids gone, the Harley rusting in the corner. The thought sent a jolt of fear through him. He made a promise not just to Maya, but to himself, to Sarah's memory, to the man he used to be, the one who had dreams and aspirations. He wouldn't let his life slip away. He would start small. He would be present. He would show up. The next day, Chester brought his lunch to work instead of buying fast food. He sat alone in the break room, eating his sandwich, a small act of defiance against the crushing routine. It was just one step, but it was a step in the right direction. 1%. The week that followed was hell. Chester, the 41-year-old industrial maintenance technician with 15 years under his belt, wrestled with demons he hadn't acknowledged in years. His back ached from bending over machinery, his hands throbbed from years of gripping tools, and the ever-present weariness threatened to drown him. He found himself snapping at his coworkers, the curt words a manifestation of the bubbling frustration inside. "Just leave it, I'll handle it." He'd grumble, turning away to hide the pain etched on his square face. His commitment to small improvements felt like a Sisyphean task. The leaky faucet at home dripped relentlessly, a constant reminder of the repairs he couldn't afford and the energy he lacked. His $45,000 debt loomed over him, a mountain of medical bills, truck payments, and credit card balances that seemed insurmountable. He even considered taking on a second job, anything to ease the financial strain. "More hours won't solve this, Chester," he muttered to himself, the gravelly baritone echoing in the empty house. One evening, Leo, his 16-year-old son, asked him for money for a school trip. Chester hesitated, his mind calculating the overtime he'd need to cover it. "I'll see what I can do," he replied, avoiding eye contact. Leo's face hardened, a familiar expression of disappointment settling in. "It's okay, Dad," he said, his voice flat. "Don't worry about it." The words stung, a confirmation of Chester's deepest fears. He was failing his kids. The temptation to quit, to sink back into the familiar numbness, was overwhelming. But then he would see Sarah's picture on the mantelpiece, her smiling face a painful reminder of the life they had planned, the life that had been stolen from them. He thought of her vegetable patch in the backyard, now overgrown with weeds. He remembered the hours they spent together tending to it, her green thumb working magic on the soil. It was a memory that spurred him on. Despite the exhaustion, despite the frustration, Chester persevered. He kept packing his lunch, saving a few dollars each day. He started taking the stairs at work instead of the elevator, a small effort to combat the softening around his middle. He even managed to spend a few minutes each evening cleaning up Sarah's old vegetable patch, pulling weeds and turning the soil, a silent act of remembrance and a tangible step towards reclaiming his life. It was brutal, but he kept going. His hidden strength, born from years of quiet dependability, wouldn't let him stop. Day 12. The lunch packing was getting easier. Chester, at 41, found a rhythm. Oatmeal with banana at 5 a.m., a ham sandwich with an apple for work. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. The weight in his shoulders, though, still felt heavy, the constant ache a reminder of the plant and the debt, $45,000 staring back at him like a monster under the bed. He remembered Sarah's laugh, how she used to tease him about his stubbornness. "You're like a diesel engine, Chester," she'd say. "Takes a while to get started, but once you're going, you don't quit." He wished he could hear that laugh again. At work, he bypassed the elevator again, trudging up the 4 flights of stairs to the maintenance bay. His lungs burned, his knees protested, but he kept climbing. He pictured Leo at his soccer game, his 16-year-old's face lighting up after scoring a goal. He had missed so many of those moments. This climb, this small act of defiance against his own exhaustion, was for them. He needed to be there, to be present, to be a dad again. Day 16. He managed to scrape together enough for a new faucet for the kitchen sink. The old one had been dripping for months, a constant, irritating reminder of his neglect. After work, instead of collapsing in front of the TV, Chester wrestled with the corroded pipes. His knuckles bled, the wrench slipped more than once, but finally, after an hour of cursing and sweating, he got it installed. Maya, his 14-year-old daughter, walked into the kitchen as he was wiping down the counter. "Looks good, Dad," she said, a hint of surprise in her voice. "Thanks," he mumbled, avoiding her gaze. But inside, a small ember of hope flickered. Later that night, he sat in his garage, staring at the '78 Harley Sportster he'd been meaning to restore for years. Dust coated the chrome, the tires were flat. He hadn't touched it since Sarah got sick. It was her favorite. "You'll get it running again, Chester," she'd said. "I know you will." He picked up a wrench, wiping the grime from its surface. Not tonight, but soon, very soon. He was starting to feel like a diesel engine starting to get going. Day 21, 3 weeks. Chester had saved almost $100 by packing his lunches. He'd also managed to walk an extra mile each day during his breaks. He felt better. Not great, but better. The bank statement still screamed at him. $25,000 medical bills, $12,000 truck, $8,000 credit cards. It was a long road ahead, but at least he was on it. That evening, he saw Leo shooting hoops in the driveway. He grabbed a ball and joined him, his knees creaking with every step. "Need some help?" Chester asked, his voice rough from disuse. Leo shrugged, but passed him the ball. They shot in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the rhythmic thud of the ball against the asphalt. Finally, Leo spoke. "The trip, I appreciate you trying, Dad." Chester's heart clenched. "I'll make it happen, Leo, I promise." He passed the ball back to his son, a surge of determination coursing through him. It wasn't just about the money. It was about being there. It was about showing them he cared. It was about being the father they deserved, and more importantly, it was about proving to himself that he still could be. He knew he had a long way to go. But for the first time in years, Chester felt like he was finally moving in the right direction. Day 30, 1 month, Chester glanced at himself in the bathroom mirror. The dark circles under his eyes seemed a little less pronounced. Maybe it was wishful thinking, but he looked less haunted. He'd consistently packed his lunches, saving close to $150. He'd stuck to his walking routine during breaks, feeling the familiar ache in his muscles, a welcome change from the constant stiffness. He even resisted the vending machine's siren call of sugary snacks. Small wins. At work, even old grumpy Ben from shipping noticed. "You look awake, Chester," he grumbled, adjusting his glasses. "Lay off the late-night reruns." Chester just shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. He didn't need to explain. Ben wouldn't understand the quiet battle he was fighting. Later, his supervisor, Marlene, approached him. "Chester, that bearing replacement on line 3? Good work, got us back up fast." A simple acknowledgement, but it meant something. He felt useful, a far cry from the invisible man he had become. That evening, Maya actually looked up from her phone when he walked in. "Dinner smells good, Dad." He'd made spaghetti, Sarah's recipe. He'd even remembered to add a pinch of sugar to the sauce, just the way she liked it. "Just trying something new," he mumbled, setting the table. Dinner was almost normal. Leo even asked him about a problem he was having with his car. Chester, for the first time in a long time, felt like he was part of their lives again, not just a tired shadow moving through the house. After dinner, as he was washing dishes, Maya walked in. "Dad," she said hesitantly, "about the soccer game, I was kind of a jerk. I know you have to work." He dried his hands, his heart aching. "I wanted to be there, Maya, more than anything." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm trying to be better for you and Leo." She looked at him, her eyes searching his. "Okay," she said softly before turning and walking away. It wasn't a grand declaration of love, but it was enough. A crack in the wall of teenage angst, a sliver of hope. Later, sitting on the porch, he pulled out the old self-help book. He read the same passage about 1% improvements, but this time the words resonated deeper. It wasn't just about money or fixing the house. It was about rebuilding himself brick by brick. He looked over at the Harley sitting in the garage. He picked up his phone, and after a minute of hesitation, he looked up local repair shops. "Hey," he said to himself, "it's about time I get you running." The next morning, Chester woke before the alarm. The usual dread was still there, but it was different, lighter. He skipped his customary wall-staring coffee and headed straight to the garage. The Harley, a '78 Sportster, sat under a dusty tarp. He pulled it off, revealing years of neglect. Sarah had loved this bike. They'd bought it as a project, a way to escape. He hadn't touched it since she got sick. He spent the morning taking stock. Tires were shot, carb was gummed up, battery was dead. A familiar wave of overwhelm threatened to pull him under, but he fought it back. 1%, just one small thing. He grabbed his phone and ordered a new battery. Then he inventoried his tools. He was missing a few specific wrenches. Another online order. Small steps. That weekend, Leo surprised him. "Need any help with that thing, Dad?" Chester almost choked. He hadn't connected with his son on a project since Leo was a little kid. He swallowed his surprise and simply said, "Yeah, actually, could use a hand cleaning up this carb." For the next few hours, they worked side by side, the air filled with the smell of gasoline and WD-40. Leo, it turned out, had a knack for it, just like his old man. Work on the Harley spilled into the week. Chester started waking up earlier, eager to get a little time in the garage before heading to the plant. He found an old service manual online and started reading up on the Sportster's quirks. Evenings weren't just about TV anymore. He was tinkering, learning, fixing. Maya even popped her head in one evening, curious about the progress. He explained what he was doing, showing her the diagrams, the parts. She asked questions. It was connection. At work, something shifted too. He wasn't just going through the motions. He was engaged. A new guy was struggling with a busted conveyor belt. Chester, instead of just fixing it himself, took the time to explain the problem, the solution. He remembered how lost he'd felt as an apprentice, how much he appreciated the guys who took the time to show him the ropes. It felt good to pass on his knowledge. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day battling a recalcitrant fuel injector, Chester almost gave up on the bike. "Just a waste of time," he muttered to himself, slamming a wrench down on the workbench. He thought about Sarah, about the dreams they had, the adventures they'd planned. He picked up the wrench, the metal cold in his calloused hand. "No," he said aloud. "I owe her this. I owe *us* this." He took a deep breath and got back to work. Small steps. The following weekend, Chester took a risk. He asked Leo and Maya if they wanted to go fishing with him at the lake. Both were hesitant, but eventually agreed. They woke before dawn, the sky a pale gray. They didn't say much on the drive, but the silence wasn't heavy like it usually was. It was peaceful. As the sun rose, casting a golden glow on the water, Chester felt a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years. Leo caught a small bass. Maya took a picture of the sunrise. They were just together. Day 60, momentum. Everything felt different. At the plant, Chester, 41, found himself almost enjoying the work. His experience as an industrial maintenance technician, 15 years in the making, was finally paying off. He wasn't just fixing machines, he was optimizing them, improving their efficiency. He suggested a simple modification to a coolant system that boosted production by 5%. The plant manager, a guy who usually just grunted at him, actually smiled and clapped him on the back. "Good work, Chester," he said. "Good work." Then came the call, HR. Chester braced himself, expecting another mandatory safety training. Instead, he was offered a promotion. Lead technician. More responsibility, sure, but also more money. Enough to actually make a dent in that $45,000 debt that felt like it was crushing him. Enough to maybe finally fix that leaky faucet and repaint the house. He thought about his late wife, Sarah, how she always dreamed of a fresh coat of paint on the old place. He accepted. The news rippled through the family. Leo, 16, barely looked up from his phone, but Maya, 14, surprised him. "That's awesome, Dad," she exclaimed, actually smiling. "You deserve it." A tiny seed of pride sprouted in Chester's chest. He was still haunted by the feeling of failing his kids, a constant reminder of his regrets, but maybe, just maybe, he was starting to turn things around. He started bringing home slightly nicer groceries. He even splurged on a new soccer ball for Maya. She looked at him, surprised, then gave him a hug. A real hug, not one of those quick, obligatory ones. "Thanks, Dad," she whispered. It was the first time in a long time he felt like he was actually present, not just a tired, grumpy provider. The bike was coming along too. The fuel injector was finally tamed. He spent hours in the garage, the smell of oil and gasoline a comforting aroma. It reminded him of his dad, another mechanic, teaching him the ropes when he was just a kid. He was starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. His secret dream of a road trip felt more attainable, less like a fantasy. One evening, Leo wandered into the garage, drawn by the sound of Chester wrenching. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to the Harley-Davidson Sportster. "My Escape," Chester replied, wiping grease from his hands. "Something I've been meaning to finish for a long time." Leo circled the bike, his eyes gleaming with interest. "Cool," he muttered. "You gonna ride it somewhere?" Chester nodded. "Maybe, someday, wanna help me finish it?" Leo shrugged, trying to act nonchalant, but Chester saw the flicker of excitement in his eyes. "Sure, why not?" Chester smiled. It wasn't a cure-all, not a magical fix for all his problems, but it was progress, small, consistent steps. He was paying off debt, fixing the house, connecting with his kids. He was still tired, still weathered, but there was a new light in his eyes, a quiet determination. He was starting to believe that he could actually fix his own life, one small thing at a time. Day 87, a Thursday. Chester, 41, an industrial maintenance technician for 15 years, stared at his bank account online. His heart pounded. He refreshed the page. Still there, zero balance on the credit card. He'd done it. He'd chipped away at it month after month, sacrificing a little here, cutting back a little there. The $8,000 credit card debt, the last vestige of the financial fallout from Sarah's illness, was gone. It was a small victory, but it felt like a monumental weight lifted from his shoulders. He remembered the stack of bills piling up, the constant fear of the phone ringing, the feeling of drowning. Now he could breathe. He could actually breathe. He didn't shout, didn't jump for joy. He just closed his eyes for a moment, a quiet sense of relief washing over him. He thought of Sarah. He wished she was here to see it. He imagined her smile, her pride. He blinked back tears. "We did it," he whispered. That evening, Chester decided to celebrate with his kids. He picked up a pizza, not the cheap kind, but the one with all the toppings they loved. He even grabbed a six-pack of root beer. When Leo, 16, and Maya, 14, walked in, they seemed surprised. "What's the occasion?" Maya asked, eyeing the pizza suspiciously. "Just wanted to celebrate," Chester replied, a hint of a smile on his face. "I paid off the credit card." Leo raised an eyebrow. "Seriously? Nice." Maya's face softened. That's really good, Dad." They ate in the living room, not in front of the TV, but around the coffee table. They talked not about chores or school, but about their day, about their friends, about their dreams. It wasn't a perfect evening, but it was a start. Chester even told them about his plan for the Harley, about maybe taking a trip when it was done. Leo actually seemed interested, asking about the engine, the parts, the route. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, Chester sat in his garage, staring at the Sportster. He ran his hand over the newly painted tank, a deep metallic blue. It wasn't just a motorcycle, it was a symbol of hope, of a life he was slowly piecing back together. He grabbed a wrench, tightened a bolt. The garage was no longer just a place to escape, it was a place to build, to create, to dream. He wasn't fixed, not by a long shot.